The cloud. To Seeing Death Clearly. I am your host, Jill McClennen, a death doula and end-of-life coach. Seeing Death Clearly is a show that challenges you to think about your beliefs around death, dying, grief, and living life. Because the more that you think about your beliefs, the healthier your relationship with death will become, and the more you will live a better life. In today's episode, I'm talking with my friend, Bonnie Silva. Welcome, Bonnie. Thanks so much for coming on with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Bonnie and I know each other because we're both death doulas, and we have both trained under the same mentor. So we've known each other for a while. This is an opportunity to have a conversation we've not had before. I'm super excited about it. I want to ask a couple basic questions to start us off about your background, because
Perfect.
I have found that our background really does affect our beliefs around death, dying, and grief, whether we want it to or not. We're taught as children what we should believe about certain things. So I would like for you to tell me how old you are and where you're originally from.
Sure. So my background, my family is from Brazil, right? So there's like about 10 of us cousins that are first generation born here in America, and I'm one of those 10. I was born in Boston. I'm an 80s baby. I was born in 82, so I turned 40 this year, the year of 2022. Being Brazilian is interesting because from far away, I look white, but the closer you get, I look more Latina, depending on the light of day. I think my tattoos are like, where are you from? I did an ancestry test a couple of years ago for my birthday, and turns out that the majority of my DNA is Portuguese, which is pretty obvious. Then it goes from Portuguese to French and Irish, and then everything is like 1%. I think that's the tricky thing about being Brazilian. Yes, it's a melting pot, but where are you from? Because I can't consider myself a BIPOC person because I don't really consider myself. I think also because of the privilege of my skin and of being white passing. I'm very, very conscious of that. Every day when I wake up, I'm very conscious of that privilege I have as a white passing person. That's like kind of me and my background in a nutshell. Being from a Brazilian family, from a Catholic country, I was brought up Catholic. We went to church every Sunday, mostly because my mom was very religious, not my biological father. Interestingly, I graduated Sunday school. My mom put me in Sunday school very early. I did all of the Sunday schools and repeated a couple of grades because I was so quote unquote advanced. So Catholic, but then nowadays I consider myself more spiritually and in tune with the universe. I don't go to church. I don't really believe in overall religion, but I believe in ritualism and energy, spiritualism. And I'm very connected to gods and earth and energy and moon and stars and all of those things. So yeah, that's kind of like me in a nutshell.
Oh, that's awesome. And as somebody that was also raised Catholic, one of the things that I always loved about the Catholic religion and the Catholic Church was the ritual. I didn't necessarily like some of the stories and the things that I was told I needed to believe just because that's what they were telling me to believe. But I really loved the ritual part of being raised as a Catholic as well.
I remember when we were at church, I was the annoying child that would be asking my mom what's for dinner when there would be a sermon because I was so bored. It was so boring for me. I thought the stories were very patriarchal and just overall not fun.
I completely agree in that it did feel very patriarchal to me. And especially the more that I get further into the death work kind of space, the more that I'm actually connecting with my Catholic background, but in a very different way. I actually took my vows not too long ago to officially become Buddhist. So I'm not saying that I am Catholic, but there's definitely parts of the Catholic religion that I'm finding I really enjoy now, but it is the ritual parts of it. And, you know, part of me will always love Mary. There was always something about Mary that made me feel, and I think for me, it's because my connection to my grandmother and Mary are very tightly tied together. My grandmother was very Catholic. She was Ukrainian Catholic, but she was very Catholic. When I think of Mary, it connects to my grandmother. And so that's probably a lot of it for me as well, especially now that my grandmother has died. Anything that makes me feel connected to her, even my rosary beads. I have
Totally.
4 beads that she
Yep.
used to sit. Even as she was actively dying, we would give her
Mm.
rosary beads and she would hold them in her hands a little bit. But I mean,
Yeah.
she would pray that rosary all the time. And so now I use the rosary beads, but sometimes I use them as mala beads to count my mantras.
That's beautiful.
And that's my way of bringing the ritual in that connects me to my grandmother and connects me to my family of origin that I don't know that much about. When I really think about it, I didn't take the time to learn the stories as well as I should have from my grandmother of her family and where they came from. Any connection I have now, I hold on to that connection a little bit more.
That's really beautiful. It's interesting because in regards to death, going back to Catholicism, we had open caskets funeral. And I've been to a couple of funerals when I was a kid. I remember the very first funeral that I went to that was an open casket was my godmother. My godmother and my godfather were very old. My parents came to the US from Brazil in 1980. They were newlyweds and then they had me in 82. They befriended this older Portuguese couple in Boston. And they became my godparents. So, of course, them being very old, they died when I was younger. My mom took me to her funeral. I don't think the conversation, or at least I don't remember the conversation around death being very like a big thing in our family. I think that one thing that my parents did good is to just normalize things overall in my life. So I think that overall, like death isn't as shocking as it would be for any other person in life. Overall, generally speaking. But I think, again, because of that Catholic religious background, it's like be good or and go to heaven and be bad and go to hell. Now that obviously as a mature 40-year-old woman, that's different. I love the idea of angels, but from what I understand and have read recently, they don't look this beautiful angelic being. They're very like crazy and supposed to be scary looking, which is very ironic, which I guess attracts me to them even more so. But yeah, it's interesting about that in regards to family and how they talk to you about death, because I had to do an ancestry.com, like I was saying to you before, to even understand my family background. There was this rumor that we had Jewish ancestry, which was a total bogus gossip rumor that I debunked just by one DNA test.
Get one of those done myself because there's a rumor in my family as well that my grandparents came from Ukraine. They came separately, met in
Sure.
Philadelphia, my great grandparents. But one of my cousins found some information that actually said that either my great grandmother or my great grandfather, one of them actually came from Russia. And so then they were like, maybe they were Jewish and came from Russia, but when they got here, they said they were Ukrainian.
My family was giving me Pocahontas vibes. Like they were hyping on the fact that they had Jewish ancestry. I never grew up with any Jewish artifacts. So I always felt like this rumor was bogus. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to debunk this with one test. And I did. I highly recommend it. Of course, you're in the database, but I'm not a serial killer, so I'm not really concerned.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned with that. I feel like existing in this time and space that we exist in as human beings, no matter what we do, we are in this connected web of data and pictures and videos, and there's no way of getting away from it. Unless
Not
you're going to
really,
go
not
like live in a
anymore.
cave.
Yeah, not anymore. As much as some people would be like, oh, I want to be analog. It is really hard to be analog nowadays. Like maybe 20 years ago, I remember my first cell phone I got at 18 years old. So maybe back then, but not nowadays. I think it's kind of impossible.
I don't even think I want to live in a world like that anymore. As much as sometimes there's parts of social media and all of this stuff that frustrates me. I mean, you and I would have never met if it wasn't for being able to connect with people online.
Absolutely. I think that online connection has really been a valuable experience in my personal experience because I have this entire community that I've never met. You and I have met in person now, but a lot of people that I know online, I have not met them. So I think it is valuable. I think it's all how you take it, right? And I think your boundaries with connection, internet and virtual and all of those things in regards to our society nowadays.
Yeah. And I think for somebody, when I was younger, probably around 12 or so was when I started to really feel very different than the people around me. And I think a lot of us have that same feeling, right? That same story.
Totally.
And at that time, there was good and there was bad in that when I was getting bullied and I was getting picked on, I could go inside my house and I didn't have the internet connecting me to those same bullies. But then also, I was very alone. I didn't have any way to find the people that made me not feel like a weirdo. I grew up in a small town. I had a single mom, which talking in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of single moms, honestly, at least not where I grew up. I got very depressed. I got suicidal. I really went to a place that was not a good place to be at. Now, I still have some of that same, living in a smaller town. You live in a big city. I still live in a small town. I do still feel a little bit weird, especially now. Like I'm the death lady in town.
And for context for your listeners, I live in Brooklyn and New York City. And Jill, you live in Philadelphia. You don't have to tell, of course, specifically where you live, but you live in Philadelphia. Am I correct about that, or New Jersey?
Well, I'm in Jersey, right outside of Philly. I love where I live and that I'm so close to the city, but I am still in a small enough town where I don't have a lot of friends in town. I have people that I speak with, but like connecting to people in this space that have similar interests to me, where I could have these conversations about death and I could have conversations about spirituality and religion and all these things that I'm interested in and not feel totally weird and alone about all of it. I love it. But then there's also the downside of the online space. I think it's like finding that balance in life and also just not taking any of it too seriously. That's one thing I've learned now. The more that I think about death, the more I'm like, you know what, in the long run, this life is not that long. So I'm not going to take any of it too seriously. If people don't like me, they don't like me. I don't go out of my way to be liked, but I'm also not going to be mean or rude to people. I'd rather just be by myself, kind of off to the side and stick with it that way.
I totally agree. And one thing I really enjoy about the online community is we're going back to 2020, right? So 2020 pandemic hit, we can't breathe around each other or touch each other's faces. But it was the year that I became a death doula, but also the year that I lost my beloved dog, my companion of 7 years. And it was the year of a lot of grief for losing the outside world, losing connections, being able to be with friends, a community that I was very much in person with, right? So I think that the benefit of being online and being able to grieve with people of the same community was very important to my growth as a human being. I think that if I wasn't able to connect with the deaf community when I did, I don't know if I would have had the knowledge or the strength that I have nowadays. And I think that that's really important of how our society has changed and evolved to be able to connect with each other in that way. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, I love the point you're bringing up about grieving during the first couple of months of the pandemic when all of a sudden life changed. It wasn't like, at least now we're kind of used to things, the last few years, there's still times that I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to go to this event because maybe I don't feel great. Maybe I'm just going to not go. Where all of a sudden in March 2020, it was like, no, everything we had planned from that moment on changed. I think it's important for people to actually grieve the fact that life did change, because that's the only way we can move forward. There's still people, I think, that are hanging on to this anger and this frustration, and I don't even know who they're angry at anymore.
Maybe it's the inability to be able to move through that grief. I think that having the accessibility for a lot of people, and I always go back to folks that are disabled. I am so much more hyper aware of them as well, that community that we as able bodies always forget about. They are able to connect to the virtual space and be able to connect with communities and be able to grieve whatever they're going through. People that are mad about online things and Zoom and how things have changed during the pandemic, that's them at their own bizarre process and not being able to move forward. I'm sure they have other problems that they're not being able to move forward from either. When it comes to the online community, how you and I met and people being able to be part of communities, including the death community, the grieving community. How amazing is that I can connect with a group of friends, a group of doulas, and be able to just talk in an open space. And we don't even have to be in the same room. Don't get me wrong. I am an extrovert. I love to talk to people, but a bitch likes to be at home. There is nothing that makes me more happy than being with now my 2 cats, smoking a joint, and just being at home, being able to have that virtual space to be able to connect with humans still is really important, but also in a bizarre way, kind of beautiful, a bizarre AI way, very beautiful, because not a lot of people can, like you and I, get out of our house with our abled bodies. I am very conscious about that as well, because I think it has helped a lot of people move through that grief, especially, we always go back to the pandemic times, like when in the pandemic times of 2020. But it's true. I think that for 99% of society, it changed everything. Some people may pretend that it never existed. Some people may go outside and pretend that none of like thousands and thousands and thousands of people didn't die. But the reality is that it did happen. It still exists. We have to always be aware. But now there's this space where people can go to and be able to vent it out and really release that molasses grief that's holding on to them.
Yeah, because the grief for everything, the way that life used to be, for the lives that were lost, there was so much grief, I think, that was felt. And what I noticed, for me at least personally, was that the grief that was coming up for me was also bringing up other grief that I'd been trying really hard to ignore and pretend wasn't there all of this time. And so all of a sudden, there's just grief in my face I had to learn to work through and process. And a lot of it for me was using embodiment techniques, using movement, using sound, journaling. I mean, just really doing anything that I could to process it in a healthy way, because I couldn't hold it anymore. I didn't want to hold it anymore. As much as I don't like a lot of what's happened over the last few years, there's part of me that is actually a lot happier now than I was before. I think that the way that the world was going, I was killing myself by that nonstop movement and pushing emotions down rather than dealing with them. I didn't think I had time. And all of this stuff was building up in me that then all of a sudden I had to face. I didn't have a choice. I was home with my family. I had to face my stuff with my family. I'm actually really grateful for that experience, but I can feel that there is still sadness for the way we lost so many people, and that it became such a contentious point between people where I lost, and I wouldn't even necessarily say friendships, maybe acquaintances, because of our different beliefs. Some of that had to be grieved as well. It's like, well, these people, they're still alive, but they're not in my life anymore.
I was just going to say that I myself, my community changed, the people that I'm in contact, the friendship group and the contacts that I've had have completely changed. Maybe it had to do with, like you said, some of the protocols, or people's minds almost like morphed in so many ways. To give context, I'm single by choice. I don't have kids by choice. I have 2 cats by choice. My life is very different than a person that is in a relationship, that has kids, or that lives in the suburbia and that has a car and that has to do things involving more people in their lives. So that being said, I didn't expect the change that happened during COVID with my community as much as it did. And I think that it took me a long time to grieve that, because I really felt the loss of those friendships. And not to that they're gone forever. They became more, it like morphed them into being more of acquaintances now. They're dear friends in an acquaintance level, but on that very closeness level, it's kind of changed for multiple reasons that I've stated. But yeah, like going back to 2020, when I did the mentorship with Jill, which you were a part of as well, I think it was really beneficial for me personally, not speaking for anybody else, on how to deal with grief and how to be mature and understand and move through that molasses-like feeling of how grief can make you feel. And I'm sure that you've seen the meme where there's a black ball inside of a jar and the ball gets bigger, but the jar gets bigger too.
Actually, I
And
don't think I have ever seen that one.
well, if I see it, I'll definitely share it with you. It's a meme stating that grief doesn't get better. It doesn't go away. You just become stronger in dealing with that loss and you move forward. And that being said, I think again, I always go back to the molasses example, or it's talk about caramel, the caramel consistency. That's what it feels like, especially in the beginning. At least I speak for myself when I was still learning how to be a death doula. It was very challenging, to be honest.
Becoming a death doula really taught me so much about myself. When we think about death, dying, and grief as much as you do when it's your career, it really kind of forces you to face some of your fears, some of your anxieties. But I also did find that it really did help me appreciate my life so much more once I worked through it. I had to go through that process. What made you get interested in becoming a death doula? I know you were a birth doula first. How did you end up becoming a death doula?
Yeah, so I was a birth doula. I started in 2015, learned about became a postpartum doula then as well. Fast forward, right before 2020, I unfortunately attended a stillbirth. That kind of changed everything in regards to birth for me personally, because it was very much like, oh, doulas really have to be careful how they word themselves, because as a birth doula, I was like, yeah, I'm like the doula. And honestly, yeah, I'm the doula. I'm not special. And we run that fine line between life and death. And right before I attended that birth, which changed my mindset, I was like, babies go home. It never even occurred to me, even though I knew that there could be a demise, like it never occurred to me that could happen when I was present as a birth doula. That made me grow up and be more mature about the profession. Before 2020, I was aware of death doulas. I started researching it because as a full-time doula, I really wanted to broaden my horizons, but also expand my knowledge as well, because I thought that being a birth doula or just a postpartum doula, for me personally, and I don't speak for anybody else, so don't come for me because I didn't call for you. I thought it was very narrow. For me personally, I thought it was a very narrow, like, oh, birth and postpartum, that's it. That's all the support we give you. But what about parents that have a demise in the family, either if it's the birthing parent or the baby? That could happen. That's just a
Yeah.
reality. Trigger warning. I apologize. I should have said trigger warning before, but that's like reality that can happen. That's human nature, right? Especially in the hospital system. Fast forward to 2020, where we were hunkered down, I really had the opportunity and the finances to be able to invest myself, being able to broaden my business into being a death doula. Sometimes I like to call it end of life doula. Sometimes I use a death doula. So it really varies for me. It's like I go back and forth, but it's the same thing, to be honest. So that's how I became a death doula. And then recently I stopped taking births because I just didn't feel connected to the birth world anymore in that sense. I'll take a birth if they really love me and they really want me as their doula, but I don't actively take births anymore because I'm finding that now that as I'm growing older, my body's getting achier. That's just comes into play as well. So being a postpartum doula and an end of life death doula, for me, I am much more connected to that space. Having had the opportunity to attend some deaths in my death doula career, I felt more connected to that calmness and that kind of grieving that happens. Very similar to birth, but it's a different aspect, if I can say it that way, because you are birthing to the other world, right? Like you're not here anymore. And some could say that you're birthing into another human being. Some people believe in the afterlife where you literally are birthed again.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact, I kind of have memories of being birthing again. And I
Ooh.
really hope that this is my last life. I really don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
That's how I became a death doula. Wow, that was a really long answer.
Oh, that was perfect because I think I've not been a birth doula, but I have had two children, especially my son. Let's see, he will be 12. I remember when I was pregnant with him, a woman that I grew up with had a stillborn baby. I was like very close to my due date. And my first thought was like, oh shit, I didn't think that happened anymore because, we're kind of sheltered from it in a lot of ways. And I just remember this feeling of like, oh my God, like but this isn't supposed to happen anymore. Like it's at that point, it was 2010. Like it's 2010. This isn't supposed to happen anymore. And then that experience that I had with him, I didn't use any pain medication. I was having back labor. It was very long. I was in labor for 28 hours. Like the experience was very painful, very amazing, just super got me in touch with a whole different part of myself and of life and all things. But I have zero interest in being there for somebody else during that experience. But yet people that are dying, it's just, I don't know, you're right. There's just a different energy to it. It feels like, I think no matter whether you're a birth or a death doula, it's really a gift to be with people during that time because it's so vulnerable. It's such a chance for us to really tap into our vulnerability, our compassion, like all of the parts of ourselves that really want to be there to support another soul that is coming in or out of life. I don't think I would want to ever be a birth doula. I know my birth was a hot mess. I'm like, I don't need to see all of that. But I think it's amazing that people do that work. I didn't have a birth doula, but my mother-in-law basically played that role for me. And it was amazing. I was so grateful that she was there for me during that role. Really, that's the way that birth doulas and death doulas used to exist in the world. It was the elders, usually the women in the communities. And we've just gotten so far away from that. And I think now, especially, my parents are baby boomers. We've got a whole lot of old people coming that are going to be getting into their time of life where, whether we want to think about it or not, they're going to die sooner than later. And
absolutely. And us millennials, we're getting older. Like, I'm already in my 40s. I already have gray hair. I can already feel like the decline. I can see the wrinkles, which I need more Botox, but jokes aside, we really, as the death doulas that are in the field, I think it's our duty to be able to really reinforce information because I know for a fact that we're needed. I know that for a fact that a lot of people, especially like women, either if you're a trans woman or not, or a person that considers themselves a woman, like we need people, we need that kind of support. And I think that being, for example, you in the poly community, me being in the queer community, I think that we have that kind of almost like torch that we have to inform people. We don't have to force them to do anything, but knowledge is awareness, and awareness leads you to making into better decisions.
Yes, totally.
And so that's really something that I think that us doulas really have to be part of, is really the information that we lack on in our society regarding end-of-life doulas, death doulas, however you want to say it.
Yeah. And even if somebody's not interested at all at becoming a professional death doula, all of us at some point are probably going to be caregivers, or we're going to be the one that's going to need the care. Right. So the more that we can learn from people like us that do this professionally, I mean, I've spent so much time reading and learning in order to just really be able to share the information with the people that don't want to devote their entire existence at this point to learning about it, but want to learn how to be better caregivers and want to learn how to navigate that situation in a way that they'll feel prepared and they won't feel as scared and they won't feel as overwhelmed. It's really important because we all will be there at some point unless we die first. It's great that there is so many death doulas now, but there's just going to be more of a need for people to care for loved ones at the end of life. A big part of why I do this podcast is because I want to normalize having these conversations and normalize people hearing somebody say the words death and dying and grief and all the things that go along with it, because we've really mainly spent our entire lives avoiding that whole topic. So I don't know. I love this work. I love connecting with people like you that love to do this work too. And it's something that I I'm just very grateful for you. I'm so grateful that I met you. I'm so grateful for you coming on here and talking
Thank
with
you.
me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my God. And I could talk to you for hours. So we'll just talk again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
We'll do a normal friend Zoom sometime soon. But I do have one last question that I did not
Yeah.
send you ahead of time, just as kind of a fun question.
Do
What
it.
do you want your legacy to be? Like when they
Yeah.
think of Bonnie Silva, what do you want your legacy to be?
I always think of being loyal. I think that that's like a huge thing for me is loyalty because I move with the same energy that people give me. And so if you show me loyalty, I show you it 10 times back. So I want to leave a legacy that I was a loyal person that moved forward with love. I think that's like a cool legacy. No, I'm not an actress. I'm not a singer. I'm not a famous poet. And I'm not going to write anything interesting in my life that renounces to a novel. As a person that will die one day, I just want people to remember that I was a loyal person that moved forward with love, regardless of whatever situation I was in or may have occurred. I think that's a really solid legacy to leave behind.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you will do that. Is there anything else you want the listeners to know? Any programs? You want them to follow you on social media? What do you want?
Yeah, you can totally follow me. I have an Instagram called EOL Doula Club. It is the comedy relief you did not ask for. On TikTok, I'm called Doula Club with similar content. I also have a website, which is just called Bonnie Silva, Bonnie like Bonnie and Clyde, BONNIE Silva, SILVA.com. I'm the type of person that like, if you come to me, but you're looking for somebody that's BIPOC, I will refer you to somebody to your criteria. And so you don't have to just come to me and stop the road there. Like I'm definitely sharing is caring, knowledge is power. And I think that there's a lot of people dying in this world. So there's a lot of doulas for everybody. The same thing with birth and postpartum. Everybody's giving birth. Everybody's in postpartum. There's a lot of people dying. So there's a lot of people that need help overall. So that's like my motto, how I live my life. I don't think that I want all the clients, me. I think everybody should have abundance. I want everybody to be on good terms financially. I want everybody to have abundance in emotion. I want everybody to have abundance in love. So that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I'll put all of your social media links in the thing underneath the podcast. I'm blanking on what that's called. The show notes. There you go. So I'll put it all in the show notes. But thanks so much, Bonnie. I love you. I appreciate you being here. And until next time, everybody, talk to you later.